Today, we have to talk about it. We have to talk about Baba Yaga. Because things did not go well. A while ago, when she was first released on PTS, I made a video discussing Baba Yaga's issues. I said that she was the worst god in the game, for now, based on the fact that she was not only clunky but also very buggy. Some of you didn't like that, and to those of you, I would like to say, I told you what would happen! But here we are. Baba Yaga has been released and her state is questionable, to say the least. Back when she was on PTS, I suggested that she should get a second PTS cycle. Hi-Rez decided not to do that, unfortunately. Maybe they couldn't fit it in their schedule because of the situation with everyone working from home. Maybe they didn't want to do a second cycle and they thought they would polish out the rest with more testing on live. It didn't really work out either way. We still have bugs with her. I'm gonna say this first because I know a lot of you have that on your mind immediately when it comes to Baba Yaga. Her 2 has apparently situations where it doesn't work, and especially her ultimate will not fire in many situations. And that obviously makes her a lot weaker than she should be. I was expecting something like this to happen, and that's why I was asking for a second PTS phase, because I figured if there are still any bugs, then we can at least find them before she goes live. Because when a god goes live and the first experience is bad, then many people will not like that god for a very long time. But aside of the bugs, what went wrong with Baba Yaga? The initial impression that most people had when they saw the character coming into SMITE and her design was actually very, very positive. A lot of people were super excited for Baba Yaga, me included, because she was something outside of the norm in terms of what we expect from a character in SMITE. She was a super highly requested character from a lot of the community. She had this association for some people with their childhood, basically, where they got told these stories. So it was overall the perfect mix for a positive reception for a new god, and her lore elements were worked in a nice way as well, especially the chicken hut I think is just really cool. But the character design is one thing, her abilities were another. When we talk about her abilities, her passive I think is very interesting and it's fine. It has its uses, it has 2 ways to be used, and while the cabin can be somewhat clunky and annoying to utilize at times, it's overall something that can easily be ironed out a little bit over time, and it doesn't feel bad. I like the fact that you can freely stack items, or in stages where you don't have items, you can go to your hut to heal a little bit. It is something unique, and it's good that way. But unfortunately, the rest of the kit doesn't really work with it. It doesn't really go along with the good design of the passive. The first big issue that there is the RNG. Now, RNG is something that in itself is disliked by many players. I want you to think about how many complaints about crit you have seen in your time playing SMITE. Some people just hate crit outright. I'm personally not a fan of crit either, and I would prefer a different way for that mechanic. But Baba Yaga is more than just that level of RNG. She is just completely RNG when it comes to her first and second ability. Sure, they still have a foundation of some things they will always do, but the foundation is relatively small compared to the things that are unreliable. When it comes to the one specifically, the first thing that is frustrating is the shapes, or more specifically the oval. The other 3 shapes actually work out pretty nicely because they all start with a line that goes to the same distance, and then the last part is what you can angle depending on the situation. Cool, I'm okay with that. I think that's the level of RNG that we would want in SMITE. But the oval just doesn't match anything the other shapes do. There's actually a gap in the center area of the oval where all the other abilities go through, that goes straight through the middle and where an enemy won't be hit by the ability. And due to the way it circulates around, it also is much harder to hit in many situations. You have to predict enemy movement path much better, you have to expect an enemy to be at a specific place at a specific time, and if you get engaged on, you have to flick the ability. This is all possible, don't get me wrong, this is not something that's super hard by itself, but what complicates this way more is that it's the only part of this ability that works this way. You have a 3 out of 4 chance that the ability will start with a line, and then there's 1 out of 4 chance that it won't. Now, you can always look down to the passive meter, yes, But the passive meter is not very well designed. Only a very small portion of the passive meter is even taken up by this ability icon in the first place, and you have to quickly get that information in the heat of the moment, and sometimes it's just not the moment where you're gonna look at the passive meter. If an assassin is jumping you in this very instant, you're not gonna look at the passive meter first. Sure, maybe you should have done that before the fight, but I gotta say, I personally don't find it fun to constantly have to look down to my passive meter between fights all the time, essentially. It's easier with a 2 here, where you actually can remember what potions you already had, but with a 1, you only really know when you quick cast, and sometimes you just don't have the option to hold this. And yeah, you could pin that on everyone just being bad, but seeing how even pro players feel like this is an awkward ability and it doesn't fit into the rest of the kit, I think you could argue that maybe it's just not the best design. I personally would love the oval shape in the game, but on another god where it's not tied to RNG in some way. And then there is the massive difference in usefulness between the different effects. You have the slow and the silence, which are the effects that you want in 95% of all situations. Then you have the very, very odd situation where you might have the movement speed increase as a chasing tool or as an escape, but these are super rare in themselves already, especially because you're usually not chasing after you already use the strongest damaging ability unless the enemy is very low. So the situations that have to come together for this are super rare. And then the protection buff is here, like, yeah, maybe this can be useful at some points if you strategically run onto it, or your teammate does, or something, but this something is a very off chance considering you have a 1 in 4 chance to get this. This is not nearly as useful in the vast majority of situations, again, especially not for a primarily damaging mage. And it's not like there aren't other options if they wanted to. They could have, for example, given you a damage buff while on the ability instead. It's a lot of defensiveness and a lot of mobility, something that a burst mage or damage mage rarely uses. In terms of RNG, the 2 is a lot more controllable. At least you can store potions and you can kind of swap them around, and you have that visual clarity whenever the ability comes up. But the problems here lie in something completely different, and that is the storage function being the same as the ability press. I talked to Ponpon about this. Apparently, internally, most people liked it that way. I cannot understand why, unless they were all playing on normal cast. He confirmed to me that they were not all playing on normal cast. But as someone who spams an ability button when I want an ability to be fired as quickly as possible, this is extremely counterproductive because it just ends up having me storing my abilities all the time. And I spam buttons sometimes because I'm not sure if the input went through, so I want to make sure that the ability goes through, so I push it again. And well, with Baba Yaga, that can effectively mean that I either end up storing the potion or that I only press it once just to be safe and the ability doesn't come up, and then I just basic attack the enemy. And both does not feel fun. It's essentially forcing normal cast on people that have been using other casting methods for years, but also punishing them immediately if they're not using it like normal cast. The usability of the potion as an ability is also horrendous. Many people don't have their key bindings so that they can just easily pull up a potion in the middle of a team fight as a damaging ability, especially on console. So there were suggestions how to fix that, and I think Harvest is still considering it, but as of now, it just feels very uncomfortable to pull up these potions unless you have them on very well placed buttons for yourself. And something that I gotta say is, it feels really weird to pull out an already brewed potion from your inventory, then get silenced and not be able to throw the potion. I understand that that may be more tied to spells working that way in general, but I'm thinking if you have a spell that conjures a potion and you have the potion in your hand, then throwing the potion, which only works by clicking the basic attack button and not the ability cast button, should work like a basic attack. This may be nitpicky, but again, as a not normal cast, felt super strange to me because for me, left click is basic attack and that works when I'm silenced. The 3 is honestly okay in my opinion, and I don't think that many people have complaints about that. And with the ultimate, I think the main complaints here are in the bugginess and in the slowness. I personally think that the slowness is something you can get used to. I think it's intended that way because otherwise the damage would be ridiculous. There are still situations where you can use the ultimate very effectively if enemies are locked down or if they are self-rooted or something. It can be absolutely devastating. Though sometimes it does feel weird how long it takes to really get that first projectile out. I do think that what's really weird about the ultimate for many players is also that it doesn't provide nearly the safety that one would assume it does, and that makes it feel bad. So what does that lead to for Baba Yaga? Well, first of all, hybrid builds are very effective for her and full damage builds rarely are. Her abilities encourage you to at least engage somewhat, and if you can't do that at all by being completely squishy, then you just run a risk and burst it. She's the opposite of SLOTH essentially. She's far from an artillery mage, even though she kind of has an artillery ult and she has long range on her 1. And these hybrid builds in themselves are complicated because they make it hard to place her in Conquest. Typically you have full damage mages in middle lane, you put hybrid characters more towards solo lane, but hybrid characters that go towards solo lane also need some form of self-sustain. She doesn't really have that, she has that through the HUD and you can kind of utilize that, but with the current regeneration rates of that, I don't think it's enough to make her really a viable solo, and then you're really out of places to put her in Conquest. No, she is not a jungler, and no, she is not a support. I've heard people say all of that. She most certainly is not an ADC either. So there's not really much for her to do there. And really where she can shine is in modes outside of Conquest, but many people value or weigh the value of a character by how they play in Conquest. In other modes, you have the problem that she typically has a very slow build-up because her early game is designed to be relatively weak in return for a stronger late game. And a slow build-up doesn't really work that well in many other modes, where often early aggression is a very important aspect to winning the game, and the snowball is higher. Other gods that do well in those modes often have some other tool that allows them to be more useful in early game, like for example Kukulkan, who has massive zoning with his tornado and also has relatively easy clear, despite getting his full potential towards late game. She generally is also extremely snowball heavy. Some snowball gods are actually really enjoyed by many players, think for example Thanatos, but especially with all the other issues that she has and how easy it is to fall behind with her, many people won't enjoy that. The experience when playing Baba Yaga may differ drastically from game to game. You can completely snowball one game and then just not get anything done in the next game, and it's just inconsistent. I guess in a way it's also an RNG aspect and it doesn't feel good. So you have a combination here. You have somewhat unfun mechanics at the moment that are not really working properly sometimes. You have a heavy emphasis on RNG. You have very little direct synergy within her abilities as well, so there's no clarity in terms of you use this ability and then this ability, which some people may enjoy, but it also takes away a lot of guidance. Say, for example, compared to Anubis, where you know you're going to stun and then you're going to put your 3 on them or something. And she heavily relies on team synergy as well, which is something that doesn't really work that well in casual modes because you can't necessarily get your team to build around you unless you're in a full pre-made. Again, another problem. She feels slow in many ways because her abilities take relatively long to fire, have relatively long travel time and everything. So that is something that many people don't enjoy. It's not the clicky responsiveness that many other characters have either. She has complicated builds, so the items that you would expect to work best don't necessarily work best on her. You, for example, would want to have some decent damage early. I used to recommend Warlock Staff. I wouldn't even recommend that anymore at this point because I think it just ramps up too slowly and she can't really work with it, despite her passive basically saying it should be effective on her. And last but not least, if you're playing on slightly higher ping, she also feels absolutely miserable because her 2 just essentially almost stops working. So putting these factors all together, all the issues with abilities and everything else that she has, as well as just not feeling good for many players, she just isn't popular right now, and I think it'll take quite a while to get her into a state where she will feel good while also being balanced, because I don't necessarily think that she is always bad right now. She can be very strong. Again, she's just super snowbally, and it depends heavily on your luck if she's going to be good in a game or not. And with that, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope this was an interesting overview of the Baba Yaga situation. If you're new to the channel, feel free to sub button and ring the bell for more SMITE videos coming soon, as well as probably some Mobile Legends videos. And other than that, see you for the next one soon. DukeSloth out.